Alright guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Well, today we're going to talk about the 10 best first cars you can buy for under £5,000. Now, all these cars listed are cars that I know very well, so I'll give you my honest opinion and I'll run through some common issues. Let's get started. First up on the list then, and bear in mind there's no particular order to this, I haven't ranked them because that's all down to personal opinion, but I couldn't do this kind of list without featuring the Mark VI Ford Fiesta. The Ford Fiesta has always been a solid choice for a first car, but my favourite is the Mark VI. Now the Mark VI ran from 2008 until 2017. In my opinion, the Mark VII, which replaced this, was a big step backwards in terms of reliability, so I think the sweet spot is the Mark VI. There were many different models and engines available, starting with the 1 litre 3-cylinder EcoBoost, all the way up to the fast ST. But my choice of the whole bunch would be the 1.25 litre. I know it's a little bit dull, but it's just so reliable. You really can't go wrong. In terms of spec, I'd keep it simple and go for something like a Z-Tech. You don't want to go lower than that. You don't want to go for a Studio or a Style because you'll get hubcaps and windy windows. So the Z-Tech really, in my opinion, is the pick of the bunch. That way it looks a bit sportier, you get alloy wheels, you can get air conditioning, things like that. So it's quite an easy car to live with. I think they look really cool, there's plenty of space in it for your mates, and they're fun to drive as well. If you do go for the 1.25, then make sure the timing belt's been done. That cam belt only lasts for about 10 years, so make sure that's been replaced. If it hasn't been, factor in about £350 for a new one. Also check the boot for water leaks, and check the steering. So when you've got your hands on the steering wheel, make sure there isn't a clunk when you turn it from right to left, or left to right. Make sure there isn't an audible clunk, because that could be a dodgy UJ on the steering. It's such a common issue with those Fiestas. It isn't expensive though, so even if it does make that noise, just factor in maybe £100 to sort it. Another popular first car, and one that I'd recommend, is the Vauxhall Corsa. Now namely the Vauxhall Corsa D, or if you can afford it, the E. Now the Corsa D ran from 2007, and the E replaced it. Again, they offered a whole host of engines, but again, a bit like the Fiesta, the one that I'd recommend would be the 1.2. I'd avoid the little 1 litres because they're a little 3-cylinder engine, and they just don't feel balanced or right. But the 1.2 litre 4-cylinder is a much more reliable unit. If your budget will stretch, then you could go for the 1.4, but in all honesty, the 1.2 does a reasonable job. Now, when you start that, if you're looking to buy one, make sure there's not an audible timing chain rattle. If there is, you need to factor in maybe £500 for a replacement. You also want to make sure it's got good service history, make sure it's been serviced every 10 to 15,000 miles max. Also check the glove compartment, because for some reason on Corsa Ds, they always fall off in your hand. It's quite an easy fix, but it's just something to bear in mind. Also check that the heater fan works on all 4 positions. This is quite a common issue. Again, it's only going to cost you maybe £100, £150 to sort out, but just make sure it works on 1, 2, 3 and 4, and not just 2 or 4. Because the Corsa has an electronic power steering system, just make sure that it isn't lighter on one side than the other. I've had this a good number of times. Sometimes when you turn left it's very light, and when you turn right it's very heavy, or the opposite way around. That could be a sign that the electric steering column's on its way out. That's a bit more costly. That'll cost you maybe £200 or £300 to sort out, so just make sure it's all fine. But generally on the whole, they are quite cheap to fix, they're cheap to run, cheap to insure, and they're quite reliable if looked after. I also think if you go for something like an SXI, then they do look quite sporty as well. A 1.2 SXI 3-door I still think looks quite good. If your budget will stretch, then I'd go for something like a limited edition, because that way you get heated seats and a heated steering wheel, but that might be just me. Next up then, everyone's nan's favourite, the Toyota Yaris. Now, I know I mock, but they are bulletproof. You really can't go wrong with the Yaris. It might not be as cool and it might not impress your friends as much as a nice spec'd Fiesta or Corsa, but in the long run it will save you some money. All the engines are quite reliable. If you go for the 1 litre they're pretty decent, or the 1.3. You really can't go wrong. The only thing you really want to watch for on Yarises is rust. Now Japanese cars famously rust, so just get under it basically and just have a good poke and prod around and make sure it's not completely rotten. Also, I'd recommend doing a vehicle history check. Check the previous MOTs and make sure there's no ongoing issue with corrosion. They also hold the value really well. They have a timing chain, so you don't need to worry about that because they rarely go wrong. And this is one of the few cars actually that I know of that you can just not service and it'll still get you to work on time. Not that I'd recommend that, by the way. You should always service your car every 10,000 miles. But if you don't with the Yaris, it won't let you down. Clutches can be a bit weak, but again, it's only going to cost you about £300 for a replacement. So when you test drive it, just make sure it's not slipping. Make sure the clutch biting point isn't right at the top. You should be fine. If you want something that's equally reliable as the Yaris, but a little bit sportier, then I'd recommend a Suzuki Swift. Now the little Swift is often overlooked, and I think that's a bit of a travesty. It won European Car of the Year back in 2005 or 2006. When it first came out, it did kind of shake up the small hatchback scene. They're a really good car. They do a 1.3 or a 1.5. Now I'd recommend the 1.3 because it'll be more insurable and it'll be cheaper to run. Again, they have a timing chain rather than a rubber belt, so when you start it, make sure there's not an audible rattle. Also, they do suffer with weak gearboxes, whether you go for a manual or an auto. Neither are completely bulletproof. So when you drive it, make sure there are no whirring noises coming from the gearbox area, because it could be a sign that the bearings are on the way out. If you're unlucky enough to buy one and that happens, then you're going to have to factor in maybe £600 or £800 to replace it. The good thing with the Swift though is that they're great fun to drive, and the build quality is really good. I'd recommend going for a 5-door because that way you'll fit all your mates in and you've still got a decent sized boot. Next up then on the list, number 5, is the Renault Clio, specifically the 4th generation, known as the X98. The 4th generation Clio ran from 2012 to 2019, and they're a really good car. They look really stylish, and because they ran until 2019, even if you go for an early one, it still looks like quite a modern car. I think they're all 5-door, but the rear doors are kind of hidden because you've got that discreet handle on the top. They're comfortable, fun to drive, and they come with plenty of technology. In terms of engines, there were 2 options available, a 1.5 litre turbo diesel or a 0.9 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged petrol. Now that might sound a little bit puny and underpowered, but trust me it's not. It's really good fun actually. Not only is it cheaper to tax and insure, but it's also nippy and quite economical. They all come with that touchscreen infotainment system in the middle, but it can be a little bit glitchy, so just make sure it all works. But they all come with things like electric windows, air conditioning, so it's a nice modern car to live with. Parts are readily available, they're cheap to fix, and overall I just think they make a great first car. So if you're in the market for a first car, definitely check out the 4th gen Clio. Right, before we get on to the next one then, I just need to say a quick thank you to today's video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark. Now if you haven't heard of Surfshark, they're a VPN service provider. If you're ever worried about hackers, data leaks or region locks stopping you from accessing your favourite content, Surfshark has you covered. Here's what makes Surfshark stand out. Firstly, it encrypts your internet traffic, keeping your data safe from prying eyes. Whether you're working on public Wi-Fi or you're simply shopping for car parts online, Surfshark will keep you safe. Plus with Surfshark you can browse anonymously, preventing advertisers from tracking your every move. But that's not all. Surfshark lets you bypass region locks so you can watch content that might be restricted in your country. Do you fancy streaming a car documentary that's only available overseas? Well, that's no problem. Just switch your location with Surfshark. The other good thing about Surfshark is you can use it on an unlimited number of devices. You can use it on your phone, your smart TV, your tablet, whatever you like. And the best part is Surfshark's very affordable. If you use my link, which is surfshark.com/highpeakautos, you'll get an extra 4 months totally free. It's the perfect time to secure your online presence and enjoy a safer internet experience. So thanks Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Right, number 6 on the list then is, well there are actually 3. It's the Citroën C1, the Peugeot 107 and the Toyota Aygo. They're all essentially the same car. I know they're a bit boring, predictable and dull, but it's one of the cheapest cars that you can run in the UK. It'll easily do 50 miles per gallon, the road tax is £20 or if you go for a 2012 onwards facelift then it's free, and they're just so reliable they're completely bulletproof. The other good thing is the insurance, it's about as low as you can get. They all have that 1 litre petrol engine which is completely reliable, they're very cheap to service and very cheap to run. Believe it or not, I drive these on a regular basis, I've even got one as a courtesy car, that's how reliable they are. Out of those 3 I couldn't really pick a firm favourite, they're all identical to be honest, but if your budget will stretch then I'd probably say go for the Toyota. Only because anything with a Toyota badge just doesn't depreciate as quickly as the others, but that's the only reason, they're all identical. There are a couple of downsides with these cars, but it shouldn't put you off. Now the first issue is the clutch. They can wear through clutches a lot faster than most other cars, but happily it's quite a cheap fix. A replacement clutch kit is less than £100 and it'll cost you probably £120 or £140 for your mechanic to fit it, so it isn't an expensive repair. The other thing to check for are water leaks. Now they can quite often leak from the windscreen and the door seals, so just feel the carpets in the boot, in the footwell, just make sure it's not all damp. Apart from that, on the early ones they can rust, so again just check the MOT advisory list. But that's pretty much it. They're about as dependable as gravity. Next up on the list then is the little Kia Rio. Now specifically I'm talking about the model which ran from 2011 until 2017. Now crucially this was the point in history where Kia started to get good. Now this generation Rio is quite a desirable little car. I think they look good, they're very reliable, and they're not as common as all the other options I've given you. They're available in a 3-door and a 5-door, both look quite good. I'd probably say go for the 5-door because it's a bit more practical. They do petrol engines and diesel. So in terms of petrol, there's a 1.25 or a 1.4, both are quite reliable. I'd probably say go for the 1.25. Or if you want even cheaper running costs, you could go for a diesel. There's a 1.1 litre 3-cylinder diesel, which is terribly slow, but it is really economical. You'll get 90 miles per gallon on a steady run. Or there's a little 1.4 litre diesel. The other good thing is they're a little bit more spacious than anything I've mentioned on this list so far, so you will have a bit more space. This era of Rio are very reliable, but there are a few things to look out for. From new, they came with a 7-year warranty, so you can kind of tell how confident Kia were with it. But you want to check the air conditioning works because they can suffer with dodgy compressors. In addition to that, check the clutch bite isn't very low or very high because they can wear out. And make sure it's got full service history, especially on the diesels, because if it doesn't, it can lead to premature turbo failure. The other common issue with these are door locks. So lock the car and then check all the doors, then unlock the car and check all the doors. If it needs a new latch and motor, then you'll be looking probably £150. The other little issue you'll find with them is interior wear, particularly on the driver's door handle and on the driver's seat. But having said that, that's mostly common on high mileage examples. On the whole, they're a very reliable car, so definitely check out the Kia Rio. So next on the list then, if you want something a bit more upmarket, are 3 premium options. If you want something a bit more prestigious but still affordable, then check out these 3. First up is the VW Polo. Now these always hold the money incredibly well, so for £5,000 you will get something much older than any of the other models I've mentioned. Like the rest, they were available as a petrol or a diesel, and they're all pretty good to be honest. The little diesel Blue Motion is capable of about 90 miles per gallon. It's incredibly fuel efficient. But my pick would probably be the 1.2 litre petrol. They're just a really good all-rounder. Just watch out on the 1.2 litre TSI models, just make sure there's no audible timing chain rattle. If it needs a new chain, then you'll be talking about £500 or £600 to replace. Make sure it's got good service history and it's been looked after, and you shouldn't have any trouble. They're a very well built, safe, sturdy, reliable car. They're available as a manual or an automatic. Now I'd probably avoid the autos to be honest. They're a little DSG unit and they're not the most reliable. I'd stick with the manual, which is less to go wrong. Next on the list then is something very similar to the Polo, only with a nicer badge. This is something of a posh Polo. This is the Audi A1. Again, it's very similar to the Polo, only it has a slightly nicer interior. You could argue the exterior is better looking, and they tend to hold the values well. If your budget will stretch, then I'd recommend the 1.6 litre turbo diesel. It might be a bit heavy on insurance if this is your first car, but if, like I say, if your budget will stretch, then that's not a bad option. It's cheap to tax, it's very economical, and they're quite reliable. They have a timing belt which needs to be replaced every 10 years, that'll set you back about £350, and just make sure you have regular servicing done, and you shouldn't go wrong. The only downside with this is, of course, parts are a bit more expensive because it's an Audi. Although having said that, there are plenty of these on the road, so you'll be able to pick up replacement parts from eBay and scrapyards. Last on the list then, and certainly the flashiest of the bunch, is the Mercedes A-Class. Now specifically, this is the W176 model which ran from 2012 until 2018. When these first came out, they sold like hotcakes. Everybody bought one, or at least leased one for 3 years. It was the cheapest way of getting a Mercedes on your driveway. That of course means there are plenty for sale on the used market. For around £4,000 or £5,000 you can pick up one, albeit with high mileage, but if it's got a good service history, that wouldn't necessarily put me off. I think they look great and you get a nice premium interior, but be warned, running costs can be slightly higher. On top of looking great, they're also quite practical and they're good fun to drive. They're available with both petrol and diesels. Now the 1.5 litre turbo diesel engine is actually a unit sourced from Renault. Don't let that put you off though, because they are quite reliable when maintained. They have a timing belt which needs to be replaced, but unlike the Renault it needs to be replaced every 10 years, so it's quite a long interval. This I believe is because Mercedes use tougher material, so it just lasts longer. That diesel's very economical and it's cheap to tax, but if you don't do many miles and you're worried about your DPF clogging, then I'd opt for a petrol. The only petrol options are 1.6, and it is a little bit more thirsty and it is quite slow. They're available as a manual or an automatic, and as much as I'm not a massive fan of Mercedes manuals, they're more reliable. The autos, if they haven't been serviced, can be quite problematic. If you are hell-bent on an automatic then, just make sure that the gearbox has been serviced every 40,000 miles because it uses a complicated twin-clutch box. And also on the test drive, make sure it isn't too jerky. Again, these can suffer with water leaks, particularly from the rear lights, so make sure the boot's completely dry and the rear passenger footwell. Also, check all the controls work properly. They have that nice infotainment system which kind of looks like a bolted-on iPad, but it can be a bit glitchy, so just make sure it all functions correctly. If your budget will stretch a bit further, then you can go for a nice AMG line model, and that way you'll get nicer wheels and nicer trim. So that I think concludes my roundup of the 10 best first cars you can buy. There really is something there for everybody. Let me know below in the comments if you've got any suggestions, but I think I've covered my favourites there. So yeah, thank you once again for watching. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done already. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and TikTok. I'll leave the links below. But yeah, cheers guys. See you next time.